So welcome to this lovely, thank you so much to all of you for joining me here. This is very exciting because I also saw that the paperbacks are now out. I can see them on the back of your shelf, Dani. Very exciting indeed. The book launch of Sunsets. Sunsets and Other Dangerous Things, which unfortunately I don't have a paperback, but you can sort of see the thing. Sunsets and Other Dangerous Things by Dani Frank, which is the debut novel, which is always very exciting. But yes, and Dani is one of our lovely book club members. So we always like to try to support our fellow members on here. So even though this book might not be as archaeologically focused, shall we say, as the last one, nevertheless, we always still love to support new writers, especially those who have something in their heart deep within, some link to anthropology, archaeology, archival research, whatever you want to call it. So we're doing this one a little bit differently. Those of you who are watching who attended our last book launch, that was more of a kind of guest speakers coming in, giving a presentation. This one, we thought it would be more fun to do a bit more of a discussion panel. So with us, we have some very exciting guest speakers. I'm just going to quickly get up the little blurbs before I misremember who is who. We have above me here, we have the lovely Amber Roberts, who also writes contemporary romance, also nerdy characters, apparently. So we are always here for nerdy characters. That's definitely one of our key things. And she is also based in the US. I think all three of you are based in the US. So thank you again for joining us in your afternoon or evening to make it a little bit easier for us. And she also has a novel coming out in a couple of weeks, I think, or 2 weeks. So the second one. So that's very exciting. Called Haunt Your Heart Out. So yes, if you're into supernatural things, then that sounds like it's not. I know it's not a fantasy one, but you know it's got the vibes, shall we say? But yes, and has already written her debut novel, so is a well experienced author, shall we say? And then we also have Amanda Wilson, or A. Wilson, who is up here, and she is our most experienced author with several books to her name, all out there with various different kinds of romance as well. Based in Minnesota, so she writes contemporary romance indeed, and I particularly like in your blurb that you said a fondness for 90s music and pop culture. I thought, yes, that's exactly what we need here. So a little bit of a range in terms of kind of levels of experience, which I thought was quite interesting. We'll see what we're planning to talk about. So my first question for all of you, just to kind of get us started, I suppose, is what actually inspired you to write a book in the first place? Because we have quite a few wannabe writers, shall we say, in our book club who are working away either at short stories, poems. A couple of us are attempting to get that first novel done. But actually sitting down, writing it, getting it through to publication. What inspired you, first of all, to do that? Perhaps, Dani, as it's your lovely book launch, we can start with you.
Sunsets, actually, the spark for that was kind of me misinterpreting a tweet a little bit. Someone tweeted something that was like, I want a book that does romance tropes really well, and I want more books that do vampire tropes really well. And I was like, so vampires, but there's only one bed. And then this just kind of like grew, like awoke something in me, I guess. I don't know. I guess it kind of like grew into like, looking back on, I was a Twilight girly back in high school, of course, as all the greats are. And thinking back to like when, like vampires, when you're a vampire, sorry. First starting out, you don't just start out rich and powerful or whatever. And so I kind of liked the idea of like, what would it be like for like a modern like millennial to suddenly be a vampire and like adjusting to the new world this way. And I thought it was a good, like it just kind of evolved, snowballed from there, realizing it was a metaphor for like traditional benchmarkers of like adulthood, having a career and a house and like, your lifelong career and a house, and there's these big like benchmarkers of adulthood, but a lot of millennials are doing gig jobs, like a bunch of gig jobs. People can't afford houses, rent, and you're having roommates, and you're an adult. And so it's kind of just like experimenting with that in vampire form, I guess.
Fair enough. That sounds like as good a reason as any to.
I think you're on mute again.
Oh, sorry, I clicked the button not hard enough. But that sounds like as good a reason as any to start a book. I must say we do have a quick follow-up question from Ash in the discussion: is were you Team Jacob or Team Edward or Team Alice?
Oh, that's fair. I was always the winning team, Team Edward. But looking back now, I'm also Team Rosalie. Now that I'm an adult, I'm like, you know what? Actually, I want a scary lady that like has her vengeance story.
Fair. Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough. Actually, and I really love, I'm afraid I haven't finished Sunsets and Other Dangerous Things yet, but I'm about halfway. And I really love, though, that the main character, the vampire, is not a sort of, doom, gloom, emo vampire. She's a really, like, sunny and really bright and really excited about things and extroverted, and that's also very different to the, like, typical vampire stories that at least I've read so far, so I very much appreciate that. Okay, so yeah, so a spark of an idea, seeing a tweet, thinking, well, no one's written about I should write about that. That's, yeah, it sounds as good as any. Amber, how about your first experiences?
Yeah, I have always kind of written little short stories. Even since I was a kid, I would write and illustrate books about my cats. And I collected Littlest Pet Shop toys, and each one of them had a story. And I still have notebooks where I jotted a lot of those stories down. But then as I got older, I started writing more complex stories. And I never really finished them. I'd get to a certain point and be like, okay, I did that. I can move on now. And then one story I was working on, which ended up being the one that published last year, I actually wanted to know how it ended. For the first time, I couldn't let go of the characters until I knew what was going to happen. So I did a whole lot of research into how to write endings of books and wrote one and liked it and wanted to see where it went.
Also a good reason. I think that's one of the main issues that a lot of our writers have in the book club, is that we have these great ideas and we have so much inspiration, and I especially have like 20 things on the go, but they're all 10 pages in, and then I just get excited and start a new thing. But yeah, okay, so starting by a tweet, starting by wanting to find out the end. So Amanda, how about your experience?
Mine is a little bit different, I think. But also the same in a lot of ways. I didn't really write fiction until probably 2016. And part of that is because writing has always been a part of my job, my day job. So, the idea of writing for fun never really occurred to me. But a couple of things happened around 2015. One, I had a kid. And then that was in the American election cycle of 2016. And I think we all remember what happened in 2016. Now, romance has always been like a part of my life that I've kind of gone back to when I needed it. And right about that time, I realized I've got this new kid, and terrible things are happening in this country. And I just only wanted to read things that ended with happily ever afters. That was all I could do. And you know what? Still to this day, almost, that's what I can handle. And so I just dove in, and I was obsessively reading contemporary romance, which was new for me because I'd always read historicals kind of growing up. And at a certain point, I remember this super clearly. I went to bed after reading some sort of celebrity romance that I was just like, this is amazing. I think it was a rock star romance, actually. It was probably one of Kristen Callahan's MVP or VIP series. And I had this ridiculous dream where I was working on the movie set of a vampire show, think True Blood. So this is connecting back with Dani. And of course, the lead actor fell in love with me. So I ended up being like, you know what, I can absolutely write some self-insert fanfics about basically True Blood. So I ended up writing a story that was a celebrity romance, like a celebrity normie romance, that was totally based on my unabashed love for Alexander Skarsgård. And then I realized as I was writing it that he had some brothers that I also found quite entertaining, and decided to start writing follow-ups about them. So those are the first two books that I published are Alexander Skarsgård self-insert fanfic, and some professional soccer player who is probably Loris Karius, but I can't really be sure.
Which I must say, I always love those when you start reading one romance series and it's probably the debut novel, and then you find out that indeed the main character has like a couple of brothers, or they're part of a close friendship group, and I always think, yes, there's going to be more. So it's great to hear that he had the brothers. But I'm curious then, Amber, did you have vampires in your life as well during your?
I mentioned Twilight and Hunt Your Heart Out.
There you go. We found it. We found the
I got a very excited screenshot from Dani when she got to that point.
I definitely DM'd you. How dare.
Which we have also a follow-up question for Amanda from Dani. Which Skarsgård is your favorite?
Yeah, it's so weird because I usually don't like blonde dudes, like tall, skinny, dark-haired guys. I'm like kryptonite. And suddenly I'm writing romance novels about blonde guys. Alexander Skarsgård all the way home. Love him.
Fair enough. There you go. I need to look up more about it.
I'm just going to start putting up pictures in the chat.
We have another comment saying 100% valid. So, I think our listeners are with you all the way, which is good. Which actually, I'm going to, I know I had a set of questions I was going to ask. I'm going to skip ahead a bit because you mentioned indeed that you used to, Amanda, write more historic fiction, more historic romance and historic fiction, but decided to write contemporary. And all three of you indeed are focused on the kind of contemporary romance, but I know that at least Amanda and Dani have sort of experience in historic in terms of their work and things like that. And I'm curious why you chose to focus on contemporary specifically in that kind of time period. Yeah, maybe Dani, let's come back to you.
I don't know. I guess I struggle from like decisiveness, and contemporary it just feels like there's so I actually did write a book before Sunsets that's not going to get published probably. But it was like fantasy, and I'm like, I'm going to make up everything. And it was great, Wild West of the brain. But yeah, for this one, I was like, I'd like to have some rules actually, and just like fit within them. So yeah, I guess contemporary was good. I also, I have no idea how fantasy people do it. I know we're in like a group with a bunch of fantasy authors, and they feel so close-knit because they're like, how do we get character art and stuff? Because people don't post that for free as much. Or like, when was this spinning wheel like used? Or so like random stuff like that. I'm like, is this word okay to use in this time period? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so much. You guys are so intense. And like, I respect it, but I'm not there.
Fair. To be honest, that's the way I prefer to write in fantasy, because then I can just make it all up. Whereas if I have to go historic fiction or contemporary, then you actually have to look up things. Whereas fantasy, you can just go for broke. But Amber, how about you?
I started writing fantasy and YA fantasy before I got into romance. And it was actually in one of my fantasy stories I was writing, a romance arc started happening without me realizing it. I have no control over my characters when I write. They do what they want to do. But when this romance arc started happening is actually when I started reading romance, because I am not really, I read, stuck into the closet and stole my mom's romance novels when I was a kid, like a lot of romance authors did, but I didn't read a significant amount of romance until I accidentally started writing a romance arc. When I started picking up romance books, I picked up a lot of contemporary because it seemed, I was afraid of historical. I was afraid to try to do that And it just kind of seemed like a good place for me to land. It just fit, I guess.
That's fair enough. And I agree with you. I also sorry. I agree with you. You all were looking at me blankly. I was going, I don't think I have my breakfast. But yeah, as I said, I also have a fear of historical, so 100% with you on that one. But
I love reading them, but I could never write one.
well, which is sort of a follow-up question I have, and maybe Amanda, you can bring this into yours, and then I'll loop backwards. In terms of, because you were mentioning, I think it was Amanda who mentioned, I read a lot of romance, so I decided to try that out. But I know that a lot of people might read certain genres, but they don't want to necessarily write in that genre. But was that something that you had in your mind, or was it always, no, I want to? So you've already mentioned, Amber, you didn't realize you wanted to write a romance until it started happening. But did that also kind of happen to any of you, or how did that work out? Maybe, Amanda, you could.
I think that's a really good point, actually, because I was reading so many historicals. And my job as an archivist is working with historical documents and historical objects, and just understanding that history is very mutable depending on whose perspective is being reviewed in the sources. So for me, I feel like when I started thinking about historicals, like I would go down all of these little rabbit holes of like, well, commonly we are taught X, Y, Z about American history. And, when actually, if you look at this very intersectional feminist perspective that's in Diary XYZ, so I would get stuck in these like little eddies that are like a little that were just like too academic, and I couldn't make the jump from like my work, professional work and writing. Like I couldn't jump to creativity when it was like that. I just found myself writing these very scholarly and academic short stories that were really, really annoying, honestly. And so I realized that I think historical is really that is kind of like just something for me to enjoy and to love unabashedly. And at the point that I really got back into romance, I just started devouring these contemporaries because I just wanted, happily ever afters to happen in modern times too. But besides contemporary romance, fantasy romance, now I guess we're going to call it romantasy, were kind of my big loves. Like I grew up a Tolkien nerd. I grew up reading Robert Jordan as it was coming out. And then there was that massive break and I almost lost my mind until Sanderson was hired to put out the last three. So I've always been very drawn to that kind of a made up world. But when it came to writing, I realized that I needed some training wheels and I needed some rules, because whenever I tried writing a fantasy, I got as far as like writing in a glossary and drawing a map. And I'm like, okay, this seems like a lot of work. I don't want to do it. So I kind of left that aside. And I think that's kind of why I started writing contemporaries. Like the world building is there. I can make a reference to something. Like if I'm writing a sports romance, I can make a reference to, the Premier League, and people will be, oh, okay, I understand what that is. Or I can make a reference to, some sort of pop culture moment, because I do love my 90s pop culture. And there's a certain zeitgeist that people will get. So it was a really good way for me to kind of dip my toes into writing and creative writing in general, is to write in this world. But since those two books, I've written another contemporary that helped me get a literary agent, but it died on submission to publishers, which was but that actually had a character from my day job kind of in it. So, and I can certainly talk about that at another point. But like right now, I think I've matured as an author to the point where I'm actually tackling a fantasy and I'm not getting bogged down in a glossary, which is really exciting to me. But I think it's just something that you find as as you continue to write and you continue to grow, you bring in all of these different influences from your life, and it really does change the way that you're writing and what you're writing.
Which
I don't know if that made any sense whatsoever.
No, definitely, absolutely. That was really interesting. I was thinking about it as well, going, yeah, I guess, because they also say, you know, don't make your hobby your job. I guess it's the same thing. Don't make your job into your hobby, almost, maybe. Like, don't let it bleed too much. But I'm curious, Dani, so you also have like background in kind of archival work. You work in museum field now, but the romance side of things. I mean, I know from your interactions on the book club that you're a big romance reader. So was it always clear in your mind? No, it's going to be a romance, like no matter what.
Yeah, it was definitely start to finish going to be a romance. I actually bought. Oh my gosh, what's the book?
Twilight.
Yeah. No, there's like a short like
Romancing
guidebook.
the Beat.
Yes, thank you. I'm like, I know you know it because you're like, it's the guidebook to write a romance book, and it's like 60 pages long, but you still buy it because you're gonna flip through it a million times trying to like write your book again. What's the next beat?
What's it called? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Romancing the Beat.
Romancing the Beat. There you go. Okay. Yes, everyone apparently knows it apart from me. Okay, carry on.
It is known. But yeah, in romance circles, so a little niche still. But yes, I got that. I was like, I'm gonna write a rom-com. It's gonna be magical. I'll make like, you know, a vampire that's like campy and funny, and like I didn't realize till later. I think Ashley might be like a himbo. Whoops. But yeah. So going in, it was my intention to make it a romance. I do like going back to like reading historic romance. I do tend towards like cozy romance and like monster romance and like funny ones. I think that's how I end up in like historic romance. Like can be so silly. I don't understand how they do it. Like is it Tessa Dare's The Governess Deal or something? She just shows up at his house in a wedding gown and is like, I need to get paid for this. Your bride bought this wedding dress for me. And he's like, well, my bride canceled, but I need a bride and you're already dressed for it. Like, what? Such silliness. Or the Gorilla Twins book, which I did not realize until like I was like, I'm not going to read the Gorilla Twins book, you guys. I don't like twincest, and like I guess I could do like Gorilla Shifters. That's fine. Blah, blah, blah. So I finally asked, what is the title of the Gorilla Shifters book? And they say it, and I'm like, that sounds like a historic romance. They're like, yes, everyone's human. There's no twin. Well, there are twins. But no one turns into a gorilla. And I'm like, what? It was so confusing. And that was probably the most bonkers book I've read where everyone is human.
I must say, I always enjoy seeing your and Ash's discussions in the book club about the various monster romances that you read. I'm thinking, is this a thing? I didn't even know it existed as a genre. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot in here. It's an education to see all the books, different kinds of books that are out there. But, and of course, oh gosh, I forgot her name. Esther, sorry. I was just thinking Ashley, and it's like, no, it's not Ashley, Esther. She is in sort of anthropology and archival research and that side of things. So was that also always intentional, that you wanted to kind of build a little bit on your experience in that sort of field going in, and you wanted to have a character like that?
I mean, so my original vision for Esther was to be a contrast to Ashley. Like I feel like you have the brooding vampire, and then the like whimsical self-insert female character that is Twilight. But I wanted Ashley to be the like kind of creepy, almost like brooding character of the book, and I also didn't want to do research when I am already creepy. I just gave her like chapter 1 starts in Anthropology 101. Content warning, Franz Boas does come up. I'm so sorry.
That gave me a little Franz Boas. I know what you're talking about.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And just like a little intro to like, she's like smart and pretty and funny, but like she's really creepy too as well. But in like a, okay, she's probably touched a human skeleton at some point, but it's fine. Like that kind of energy. Haven't we all?
Haven't we all? I was about to say. We are in the Archaeo Book Club here.
Welcome to Archaeo Book Club.
Most of at least the members listening in have definitely touched a skeleton at some point. Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, yeah. And Amber, am I right in thinking you're sort of copy editor, writing still a lot in your day job as well? So did you also find that you had to try to split it? Like Amanda was saying, was some overlap coming in?
My copywriting in my day job is very boring copywriting. I do product descriptions for bed sheets and industrial supplies. So it's not difficult to separate that copywriting from the book writing that I do.
Could you imagine if you meshed them?
It's a new challenge. I'm going to have to do it now.
I can see that.
And then the bed sheets happily ever after.
There was a book I saw somewhere, I think it came by on TikTok or Instagram, of someone who said the woman fell in love with a fork or something. That's like
the fork one. Yeah, I haven't read that one, but I am familiar with its existence.
Could be a thing.
It's called Forked? I don't remember now.
It's the sentient object romances.
Yeah.
Like, there's the one about the door. I know someone who wrote a whole book about cheese shifters.
I haven't heard the sheets one.
Cheese shifters, cheese.
Oh, cheese. Oh, no, I haven't read as much food, except the potato, obviously.
Apparently Unhinged is the
door
one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, like I say, I'm very out of my depth here with all of these things. I'm afraid I'm very classical in my romance reading, but I want to try these new ones because I'm like, how does it work? In my head, I can't think how it would work, but yeah, apparently that sort of works.
Unhinged does have a bit of a classical subplot to it, so gosh, we could add it to the list.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll add it. I'll add it to the book list. Maybe at some point we'll have a sentient objects theme. Read that one. But so
I would love to come back for that one.
It's where you get all your romance readers.
Yeah, right.
I mean, they can. I think it could be fun. The last one already was our first proper romance book, I would say, and that already a lot of people going, oh wow, this is a romance book. So we can take the level up, we can ramp it up even more and say, right, now we're writing one proper materiality, object agency style thing. Sorry, I'm just quickly checking because I've definitely skipped around a bit in my questions here. Going back to the kind of the actual writing of the book and the sort of writing process, so to speak. So we've talked about so Amanda talked about how kind of the kind of books she wants to write has maybe changed a little bit since she started publishing a few more. Would you say that through, Dani, you've written your debut here, Amber's onto her second one, Amanda's onto her fifth one by now. Would you say that your writing style within those kind of different time periods has developed very much? Has it changed a lot to what it was at the beginning? Has it been influenced by comments that you've had back or other books that you've read? How has that kind of changed for you, so to speak? Maybe Dani, you can start us off. Yes.
I do think I've got plans in my head for a bunch of contemporaries coming up, and I think the main point of writing this paranormal was to just like learn how to write a romance book, because it is very like formulaic, but that just makes it more of a challenge to like flip tropes and have something new and interesting and exciting. That how do you balance spice between like emotional attachment, that sort of thing. I think this was just me learning how to get from the start to the end of that, and I do think I love the characters. They're really great. I might have some ideas in this universe still. But I do think I've learned from it how to like build tension and balance the different like romance arcs versus plot arc, that sort of thing. And I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, no, exciting. I just know that when we had our last book launch, AM mentioned that her first draft was completely different focus, almost completely different characters slightly, and then compared to the sort of last. So did you find that as well, that the characters themselves, you say you love the characters, were they always like that? Have they also changed a lot?
I think they've stayed pretty consistent. I think Esther got developed a bit more as like the drafts went on, but my first draft was like my first draft was like 73,000 words, and then the final is like 96, so it did grow a bit, but I feel like I grew more like the universe, or like, I don't know, you like clean things up along the way, like my editor's reading it like, where'd this house go? And also a car. I'm like, oh, sorry, I lost those.
Yeah, okay, nice. So it's more sort of editorial things, contextual things that get sort of, okay, interesting. How about you, Amber? Have you found, for example, writing the second book, is it markedly different to writing the first book? Did that also change a lot during the process?
I would say that I've always been a bit of an underwriter, so when I go to revisions is when a lot of the book is bulked up. But somewhere between the first book and finishing the second book, I started drafting something new, and I always used to be a pantser, so I didn't plan ahead, I didn't outline, I didn't come up with... I basically had an idea for a character and sat down at a keyboard and started writing without any ideas for even, where they lived or what they did. No details. But now I've somehow discovered outlining and plotting, and so we'll see how long that lasts. But the current project I'm working on, I had a whole outline start to finish before I even wrote the first sentence. So, and that made revisions so much easier. So I really hope it sticks. But in terms of the other books that I've written, the first draft and finished draft are usually nothing alike, because I would sit down and start writing and not have a plan. So I had to fix things after I finished the draft.
Fair, yeah. Which, yeah, it's good to hear. Well, on the one hand, it's nice to hear that the first draft and the last draft are the same, as someone who's aspiring to go into writing. On the other hand, it makes you feel very disheartened because, of course, you're like, no, this is the perfect paragraph. And you know that probably is going to just get deleted. Amanda, how about from your experience?
So my first book was just like complete wish fulfillment. So I just like went at it writing. But when somehow somebody decided they wanted to publish that, I was like, oh, now I have deadlines, and and that's weird, and that's hard. And so I started really just devouring a lot of different writing craft books, and I took a couple classes and stuff from some great authors. Alyssa K. Adams is one of them, who did the Romance Book Club, and just kind of understanding how people write and how to contextualize it. And I guess I've always been an outliner for any papers or whatever, or articles that I've written, or book chapters even in my day job. So it was kind of a natural thing for me to start outlining a book. And I've also realized, like, I am the kind of storyteller who is more plot focused than characters. So for me, it's really important. Like, I have to know what the beginning, the middle, and the end of the plot is, the story. Like, forget about the romance. Like, I need to know what's happening in this story, and I need those three points, or I can't get started, or I won't get started. But once I have an idea of what the story is, and I go back and I have vague ideas of what the characters are like, who populate this story, but then I start digging into the characters and figuring out what they're like. But in the end, I actually don't start writing until probably I have like a 10,000 word outline done. which is, I know, excessive. This fantasy book that I'm writing, like, almost embarrassing, like how many it's in like an Excel workbook, and it's like 15 different pages that includes everything from like character names to like scenes, and I try to end up with like a page of information about each scene or each chapter before I start drafting. So that way, like when I do draft, like plotting and brainstorming for me that is the joy of writing. I love that. Drafting is less fun for me actually. But when it comes down to it, I have broken this story into so many pieces, so many different times that drafting actually isn't, I'm able to do it pretty quickly. And then the fun of revising it's again, and that's kind of like reverse brainstorming. So I also enjoy that. But actually, my first drafts don't change a whole lot. It's the drafts that get submitted, just because I've done outlining and reverse outlining almost before I even start drafting. So the story, you know, like I've made sure that the plot, at least in the romance, the plot at least is airtight. I would say the one difference between my first drafts and the drafts that go like to my agent or whatever are second drafts for me are where the character stuff happens. So like feelings. And I guess, you know, in a romance, feelings are super important. So they really they kind of make their appearance in the second draft. That's the difference.
But that's really fascinating to hear, actually, because that's like, and also you mentioning, Amber, that you just kind of go at it and don't before, but not now. Now you're planning like crazy, but before that it would just sort of go off. Because we were talking about this the other day in terms of mysteries, whether, you know, the way to go at it is just to say so-and-so's died and then try and work out who the murderer is along the way, or whether you start off with the idea of the murderer in your head kind of thing. And I'm curious with romance then, we recently read Lizard's Hold the Sun by Dani Trujillo. I'm not sure, I'm probably saying her name horrendously wrong, which was fantastic, and it was focused on archaeology, of course, Archaeology Book Club, so the main characters were archaeologists, but then of course it was a romance book, and quite a few of our members actually sort of said at some point, they're like, oh, it's a shame, the archaeology was getting really interesting, and then they started having sex, and like I wanted to find out what was happening with the archaeology, like, and what was happening with the site. But it's interesting what you said, Amanda, about like the story and the plot happening first, and then the romance kind of filling it in. In all of your kind of methods of getting at it, is the romance story the main part and the sort of plot fills in, or is it that you have an idea for the plot and then the kind of, okay, which characters can fall in love, or how does that work? Maybe Amber, let's start with you this time.
I think I tend to come up with the characters that are going to be paired fairly early in the process. Now that I'm outlining, I have ideas for both of them. But even when I was just drafting, I would at least know kind of who the characters were. And I tend to write characters who complement each other or maybe significantly opposite of each other, because I think that's a fun dynamic to play with. So it becomes kind of fitting, like working a plot around who those characters are. So I would say I definitely start character first and then kind of work plot and maybe the romance into that, but I think the romance comes a little bit organically as I write. Maybe.
What would you say, Dani? Are you the same or different?
Plot or character first? I don't. I'm not entirely sure, actually. I'm like trying to remember. I'm at the point where I need to like start working on my next book. And I'm like, how do I write a book again? So I'm like trying to remember all this stuff all over again. I haven't really been advertising it that much, but I think Sunsets was kind of easy because it kind of worked out. I kind of wanted to write a like romanticized Samson and Delilah retelling, actually, and like if you, I don't know, spoilers, think about it in the book, it's kind of that. So I guess it is a romance, but it's like structured. There's already kind of like a storyline. So I'm trying to think how to do that with my next ones. Or I guess romance already has like built-in tropes that you could use. Opposites attract, bodyguard princess, the chaos. These are a lot of like opposites that I'm doing here, but yeah. I don't know. I'm learning it again.
No, but it's interesting to hear. And I mean, Amanda, you've already kind of answered this question, but I don't know if you have anything further you wanted to add.
I think we all kind of naturally gravitate to a certain type of pairing. And Amber, what you said really made me start thinking about that, because most of my pairings are like fish out of water. And then person who lives in the world, and then this person kind of like another person kind of like crash lands in. And I think the way we start telling stories a lot of times, and Dani kind of touched on this earlier, is it's kind of like the rule of improv, where you're like, and then, and you just keep building on the and then. So like when Dani was saying, what would happen if two characters and one was a vampire, like a millennial vampire, and then, and I think that that's the way that we kind of, I think that's a really great way to think about how to start building a story, you know, whether you're plot first or character first. I'm always like, what would happen if two people who are going to fall in love, and I'll figure out the rest of that later, do this. Yeah, so I think just like Amber usually writes, and I've read her books and I've read Dani's as well. A lot of opposites attract. I tend to go for the fish out of water scenario, and it just kind of, I'm thinking like now naturally, like this just happens over and over again, just in different ways.
Which, and I forgot to ask you though, Dani, are you a plotter or what was the other word? Pantser?
I was thinking that when you guys were describing your different things, I'm like, I've never felt more like a plantser, like the in-between one. So I definitely don't do a 10,000 word outline. But I like to have like big moment in the middle and like a vague idea of the resolution, and I might like write like a query letter. So I've got like the vibes and an idea of the characters, and I'll just like see how they get to point B. Like I know where point B is, but I don't know how we get there yet.
It's the ultimate writing the abstract for the conference before you've even done any of the analysis or anything, and being like, yeah, I'll get there at some point. Keep it vague.
This is the goal.
Yeah, at some point we'll get to that point. But yeah. So we're coming towards the end of the hour. If anyone who's watching, if Ash or AM who are watching live have any questions, feel free to pop them in. And also, I guess if anyone who's watching this later has any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or come by the Discord server. I'm sure we can forward them on and get you some answers at some point. But I have some more individualized questions. So for Amber, you're, indeed about to release your second novel, publish your second novel. And you've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but did you find there was anything remarkably different in how you approach this second novel to how you approach your first one, either in, I don't know, your mindset or how you approached it, how you worked through it?
I would say the vibes are different. My first one was very high-end comedy. It was like a lot of situational comedy, and it's a very different kind of feel. And this second one is, I went deep into my soul to pull out all of the feelings that I had deep inside to write this one. And it's full of nostalgia and a lot of emotions that I didn't feel like I could write before for my first book. I didn't feel like I was ready to write something so full of feelings. So I would say a lot of that is maybe a change in my belief in myself and ability to make it happen, but also knowing that I can write those things too and find that audience as well. Or there's probably crossover audience that'll like both.
Yeah. And do you find now that you've had one, it's out in the world, I mean, for example, do you call yourself a writer? Do you have that a less imposter syndrome now, or is it expanded because there's a book out in the world?
I have two kids. They just went back to school this year, and we have paperwork we have to fill out. And for the first time this year, under mother's occupation, I wrote author. And I stopped for a minute and I looked at it and I was like, it says author. So yeah, I still I forget sometimes too. I forget and I see my book on a shelf. I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote that because I'm an author. So I'd say a little bit of both. Like I embrace it sometimes, but also sometimes it's not really in mind. I think sometimes my brain needs a break from thinking about it too.
Fair. I guess the pressure could be too. You don't want to put too much pressure on yourself, so it's
Yeah.
yeah. No, but that's good to hear though that it gets well done. That's I think yeah. I know from archaeology that's also sometimes a big step to look and say yes, I'm an archaeologist. And they're going like I mean remember you said Dani, I'm not an archaeologist. I already have a bachelor degree. I'm going yes, you are an archaeologist. Like that is the definition of an archaeologist. But so I can imagine it's probably similar with authors having that kind of self-confidence to be able to say that. Sorry. Yes. So, Amanda, you already mentioned a little bit. Oh dear, my camera's gone funny. Okay, there we go. Sorry, it was saying, it's falling asleep. My computer's falling asleep. Time to start wrapping things up. Yeah. So we mentioned already, indeed, you work in kind of archival research. And you already mentioned a little bit. You're going into sort of fantasy and that side of things. But is there any plans in the future to bring more of the work into the writing, or are you just going to see how it goes?
Well, it's kind of funny. I did write a book with a rare book librarian as a character, and that was a lot of fun to write. I think mostly because I was able to I work in an academic library at a university in archives and special collections, so that's its own kind of interesting academic circle of hell, if you will. So I think I was exercising a lot of demons with that character, but and it was actually really good and productive for me. So I did enjoy that. I think with the fantasy element, it also has a library in it. So that's kind of making its way in. I feel like every book I've written since the first two that were published, everything I've written since then has gotten a little bit more serious, less like slapstick when I think about it. And it's pulled in like parts of my life that I never thought would appear in a romance novel. So in a sense, I think I'm getting better as a writer, and I'm just finding it really funny how many pieces of my actual life are coming back in. It makes me a big stickler. I'm sure you, as an archaeologist, when you read an archaeology, a bit of fiction that includes archaeology, you're like, they wouldn't use that spade.
I mean, that's basically the whole thing of this book club is us going, that's so right. Incorrect.
You're like, they use a brush. I don't actually know. For me, I always am like, I get hung up on like anytime they put a library or an archive or a rare book, I'm like, they've got somebody wearing white gloves. And I'm like, absolutely not. That's not how it works. So that's my thing.
No, which is good. Which is, to be honest, we've worked out as well by reading archaeological fiction that actually the best representations of archaeology, the author always has some kind of background in anthropology, archaeology, history, something related, which, so, indeed, we appreciate it from afar when we see something represented well. So, Dani, you had mentioned, I think, at some point that you would love to, at some point, write an archaeological, anthropological romance. Is that something that is on the cards? Is it still a kind of vague idea?
I have, okay. Yes, but it'll probably be a while at this point. You're like, okay. Oh, calm. Yes, I'm so sorry. I do have a vision for more in the Sunsets series universe. I do have another series that I'm been working on that I've been referring to as my emo book, I guess. But that one is actually the start of basically me being like, what if I just went through my like archaeology CV, basically? I don't know. So like the first one has like a museum worker in it, and then I have another one where she's like a like survey She's in a survey archaeology crew, that sort of thing. And then another one where they're just doing an excavation on one site. I don't know. I've got ideas.
Well, there's very positive responses coming through so far in the chat, so we're all for it. We support you all the way. Oh, great. No, that's exciting, though. Exciting to hear. So a final question for kind of all of you to round this off. If you could, well, I don't know how to say it, either if you could give advice to someone who's just starting out, if you could look back at the start of your first publication process and think, what did I wish I would know? I guess specifically in terms of getting that novel done, getting it published, especially romance, I suppose, as a genre as well. What would be your kind of pearls of wisdom that you would offer the world? So maybe Amanda, we can start with you this
time. I think my advice would be just to write it and don't worry about whether it sucks or not, because chances are the first, the second, even the third thing you write, it's not going to be great, and that's okay, because you only get better because you keep doing it. So the more you stick with it, the more comfortable you get in your writing persona. So yeah, that's my thing. Is it's going to suck at first, but you keep doing it, and you will get better. Oh, don't get hung up on like, oh, what if it sucks? Because it's going to. And I mean, the first thing I wrote, nobody should read. So.
Which I hope it gets published now. I look forward to seeing that. So, Amber, what would you say?
My advice is more related to the people you surround yourself with. Rather than writing, you need to find your community. Find writers who are at the same phase in their writing as you. Share your writing with them. Giving feedback and receiving feedback on your writing goes really, really far in helping you to improve your writing, and having that community of writers with you really helps when it comes to the rejection phase of writing, because that's not a fun phase. But having people who you can share that with is really important to keeping going.
That's good. Good to know. Good to know. Which hopefully we've got a lovely little group here of writers. We're all writing very different things, but it's so far I can agree. It's very nice to have that support. And Dani, finally, now you're at the end. The book is on the shelf behind you. What would you wish you had known?
I think the most important thing, like as far as like the writing process goes, is take the things that you can control seriously. If you need a writing schedule, keep up with a writing schedule. If you need flexibility or like to take time off, take time off. And then be flexible about the things you can't control, like the querying phase. Just, you control how many you send out, but you can't control what the answers will be. So yeah, just have backup plans, because who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great combo of wisdom there. Have backup plans, go with the flow, don't get too caught up on the details, surround yourself with people who support you, and don't worry if it sucks. That's great. No, but I think I know that a lot of us who are writing at the moment are getting very caught up in all the, but this isn't perfect, and like you say, it will change and it will adapt. So I think that's great advice. Well, I think then that we're coming to kind of the end of the hour. I think it's time to sort of wrap things up. So thank you so much to Amanda and to Amber for joining us on this discussion panel. It was really interesting to hear the different perspectives, the different styles, and I love that this shows that there's indeed no one way to write a romance novel, or a novel in general, but even a romance novel, there's no right way to write it, and there's no one way. So thank you so much to both of you for joining. And of course, thank you, Dani, for talking to us today about your process. A published author, or yes, right? So it is out now. You can order it. So although perhaps you want to tell us a little bit about exactly, because it's coming out this week, correct?
Yeah, officially the ebook comes out Thursday the 19th. Yes. Should I talk about it? Okay. Let's do this one.
This is your moment. This is your time.
I know, this is my time. All right, it's Sunsets and Other Dangerous Things. It's a sapphic vampire romance, obviously, about a millennial vampire that's passing as a regular human college student, and she accidentally, through her shenanigans, entangles herself and her school crush, the grumpy graduate archival student, in an ancient feud between vampires and witches. um, Spoilers, they live happily ever after.
Perfect. So yes, so check anywhere. It's available everywhere: Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all kinds of places. Anywhere in particular people should go if they want to find out more information? Will you have things on your website, or is it Instagram?
I have my website. I'm mostly on Instagram, but I have like a link tree with other stuff on there as well. Yes, Dani-Frank.com is my website. The dash is important. Sorry, other Dani Frank in the world.
Although, better than I know that there was one author, Jodie Taylor, and Jodie Taylor was her pen name, and she didn't Google it before she picked it, and apparently it's also the name of a very famous porn star. So, at least she said she got some interesting messages back from people. So, you know, there you go. So yes, Dani-Frank.com and the Instagram link tree. Check it all out. You're also very welcome, if you're watching this on YouTube, to come and join us over here on Archaeo Book Club if you are a fellow or ex-archaeology, anthropology, museum person who might want to get started in writing, and specifically writing romance. We have two published authors now on the book club. So yes, do come and join us. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening. And congratulations again, Dani.
Thanks.